are about to start our session, and I would like to welcome you to this afternoon segment session co-convened by IOM, UNIOM, and also the Chilean Youth Major Group to UNEP. And before we start, I'd just like to take you through this session's objective and also what we aim to achieve for this session. Mostly for this session, we aim to this session on environmental change and human mobility pathways for climate action. We tend to achieve several objectives. One, we are examining how environmental changes shape human mobility, especially among its young people, and how mobility in turn affect ecosystems. We're also trying to identify opportunities for youth engagement in migration policy, showcasing how youth-led solutions can be able to, help in implementing solutions and facilitating dialogue between youth experts and also policymakers on how they can be able to generate actionable solutions and insights. And basically, we'll also have a session on Q&A to get your views. But this session is also a culmination of months of preparation and also a culmination of IOM Youth Training segment, which happened recently here in Nairobi, where we had many young people all over Africa through the IOM Horn of Africa office coming in together for these training sessions. We'll be able to add later more on it. But mostly now that we're discussing about this session on human mobility, several policy frameworks are already reflecting part of these dynamics. And for example, the Paris Agreement, the Rio Conventions, and also the Kampala Declaration on Climate Change and Migration. But already we still see there's so many gaps in terms of implementation of policies. And also this is one of areas we want to discuss. And this session co-hosted by International Organization of Migration with Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP. And we're aiming to highlight interlinkages between migration, the environment, and also how they relate to UNEA mandate and the Rio Conventions. And so we'll be able to get to hear from our panelists as well, and also we'll be happy to get some of the inputs and feedback from you. With that juncture, we are now going to play a brief video from the Pacific Island Secretary General, His Excellency Baron, and then after that, Nora will take us through. Thank you.
Warm Pacific greetings, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It is my privilege to offer a keynote address for this important event. We Pacific Islanders have always been navigators and voyagers, exploring lands to settle and to test our VACA and navigation skills for long voyages. This migration was of our choice, to find land, grow our roots, establish community, and ground our culture, customs, and traditions. It was migration by choice and with dignity. As with our ancestors, migration remains integral to achieving the vision of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific, which aims to ensure Pacific peoples remain resilient to the impacts of climate change and disasters and can lead safe, secure, and prosperous lives. Pacific Islands people now have many avenues for migration, both for short-term labor mobility and for long-term or permanent migration. Ensuring migration with dignity in this context is at the forefront of Pacific leaders' minds. For example, Pacific Islands Forum leaders this year endorsed the Pacific Regional Labor Mobility Principles to ensure dignity, rights, and certainty for Pacific Island labor migrants. Ensuring the rights and dignity of Pacific communities becomes even more challenging in the context of climate change and mobility. Indeed, we are already witnessing Pacific Island communities forced to make decisions about whether they can remain safely in their homes or if they need to relocate or migrate due to climate change impacts. To support these communities and the many others who may face the same risks in the future, the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility was endorsed at the 52nd Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting in 2023. The framework commits to addressing climate mobility in a way that is rights-based and people-centered, and aims to protect and uphold the cultural tradition, statehood, and sovereignty of Pacific Island nations. An important point I wish to stress is that under this framework, not only do leaders commit to ensuring migration with dignity, but also to staying with dignity. That is, through their endorsement of the framework, forum leaders explicitly recognize the preference and right of all Pacific peoples to stay in their home islands and communities. Remaining in place is not just a practical choice. It is a deeply rooted in identity, culture, heritage, and sovereignty. Remaining in our ancestral lands with safety and dignity is a right our region is determined to uphold. It is crucial that youths are included in decision-makings about climate mobility, as decisions made today about relocation and migration will impact your abilities to remain connected to cultural identity and traditions. Importantly, we have taken steps to be explicit and deliberate with our intention to implement the climate mobility framework. In August of this year, a 5-year implementation plan for the framework was endorsed to do just that. The plan is based on extensive consultation with a range of stakeholders, the voices of young people advocating for rights and inclusivity during these consultations was crucial for keeping us accountable to the commitment made in the framework. The implementation plan consists of 5 priority actions, which in short aim to help countries understand which communities are most at risk of climate displacement, know how to reduce that risk in a rights-based, inclusive, and culturally appropriate manner, and access the necessary finance and technical support to take action. The 4th priority action in the implementation plan aims to ensure climate mobility actions in the Pacific are inclusive and safeguard and protect the rights and cultures of Pacific communities. The mechanism for doing this is the establishment of a priority action committee to provide guidance and advice on rights-based, inclusive, and culturally appropriate climate mobility action. While this priority action may seem somewhat ambitious, thinking more broadly, we can see that what it in fact does is carve out a regional space for the next 5 years for advancing dialogue, research, and knowledge exchange on human rights in the context of climate change in the Pacific. A crucial starting point for this committee will be drawing out the lessons from the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, a global milestone that was driven by the initiative and courage of our Pacific youth and the government of Vanuatu. To conclude, while the Pacific Islands region remains at the forefront of climate change impacts, it is also at the forefront of dignified and rights-based action for climate justice. We recognize the unique position of Pacific youth as both vulnerable to climate impacts and powerful agents of change. They are not just participants in this journey, they are leading the charge. And I thank you.
Thank you for the Secretary General for the keynote opening speech. And I very much also want to welcome you all to this session where we focus on understanding the environment and migration nexus and to hear the youth perspectives and action. My name is Noora Mäkelä. I'm a program officer here in Nairobi. I am the UN Migration Agency. We have a regional office here for East, Horn, and Southern Africa. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you today and see you all in this room, although there is a competing climate and finance session ongoing. But while that is important, it's also very important to discuss about this nexus on environment, migration, and climate change, and also the local solutions that the youth are leading. And while to me this feels like a very official setup sitting here in front, but I would also like to hear from you. So as we move forward to the panel discussion, I would also like to hear and engage with you from the audience and hear what are some of those solutions that you are actually implementing at the local level or that you know of, and what has been the impact of them. It's very important because we know that youth claim want to advocate their space in the policy discussions, but we also want to hear what the strengths actually are and what the solutions are that youth can bring. So prepare for that and join the discussion with us. But before going into the discussion, I would like to tell you a little bit more of what we do as IOM, the UN Migration Agency, in this topic. And as a background also to broaden a little bit the narrative when we talk about climate migration or the different terminologies of that. But probably because you are here, you know that climate-driven displacement is surging. And last year alone, there was a record number of 45.8 million new internal displacements, and 10 million people couldn't return back to their homes because it was unsafe or the land was too damaged. But of course, behind these numbers, there are real lives and livelihoods of families affected by floods, for example, in Pakistan, in Libya, youth affected in the Horn of Africa due to droughts and floods as well. And we know that these risks are escalating, and if we don't act up, these numbers keeps on rising, both because of the sudden onset disasters, but also the slow onset changes. Talking about, for example, sea level rise, desertification. And usually the vulnerable communities, those who are least responsible for this, are the ones who bear the heaviest burden. But human mobility is also not only a consequence of crisis, but it also shapes the environmental and adaptation outcomes. And at the same time, we also have to remember that when we talk about human mobility in this context, it is inherently multi-causal. And this means that while the environmental factors play a role and what can drive migration and displacement, we also need to understand that different social, political, economic, and demographic factors play a role. And climate change impacts more specifically appear as a risk multiplier, exacerbating the causes of forced and voluntary migration. And that's why our response matters. Too often human mobility is seen as crisis to be prevented at all costs, but also migration can be an adaptation strategy when we talk about this, a way for people to move, to protect their dignity, sustain their lives, livelihoods, family lives, and secure their futures, as we also heard. And this needs to be supported with the right policies, access to protection, recognition of rights, pathways to education, livelihoods, and migration can be a source of resilience rather than a vulnerability. And migrants, they can also contribute to environment and climate action through many different means, investments, remittances, sharing skills and knowledge. At IOM, we have an institutional strategy which speaks to this with the three main objectives. And the goal is to increase the scope of options available to individuals, households, and communities affected by disasters, climate change, and environmental degradation, including the most vulnerable ones. And the first one is to develop solutions for people to move managing migration, promoting approaches, facilitating orderly, safe, responsible, and regular migration in the changing climate. Second is to develop solutions for people already on the move, assisting and protecting migrants and displaced persons through anticipatory action, life-saving aid, and rights-based approaches. And the third one is to develop solutions for people to stay, building resilience and addressing the adverse effects of climate change and environmental degradation that compel people to move, so that to avert migration out of necessity. And we work also among several policy frameworks: Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and also the MEAs, such as the Paris Agreement, the UNCCD and UCBD conventions. And we work together with both internal and international migration. And when we talk more about this and go deeper, there are actually several different dimensions of migration. We talk about displacement, rural-urban migration, pastoralism, seasonal migration, and labor migration, among others. And we work together with member states, regional economic communities, but also with the local and vulnerable communities to address the challenges and also the opportunities of climate mobility, fostering the resilience and adaptive capacities to climate change and environmental degradation. And one of the policy frameworks worth mentioning in the continent is indeed the Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change, similar to the Pacific ones that was already mentioned. And the youth have also been very much engaged in that process. So policy coherence, ensuring that the different human mobility dimensions are incorporated into different climate and disaster-related policies, and vice versa, climate and environmental considerations in the migration policies. And ensuring that there are capacities to really implement these policies as well. As we heard in the previous session, that the gap is usually in the implementation. But we also then address the other gap, which is many times access to data. Data might be there, but how is that access? How is that putting together coherently so that we can build evidence-based responses and policies as well? And then really working together with the local communities to find these local solutions. And youth engagement is very important in this matter. And we have actually several means that we engage with youth, as we understand that youth are actually actors, innovators, and leaders in this space, not just the victims of these events. I mentioned the KDMAG, as we call it, the process. In 2022, the declaration was signed in this region, and the youth engagement was very prevalent. Youth were able to put together their key messages, participate in the discussions, and get their messages into the declaration. Indeed, youth engagement at different levels, also participating in the global policy processes through the UNFCCC, but also the other Rio conventions. And actually we met recently together with the different youth constituencies and networks and discussed what the common priorities are to really look at migration in these policy frameworks and what can we do to work together. We also do several capacity enhancement sessions, shorter ones, longer ones. We just completed this 3-month training. We have Ebube here who will talk a little bit more about that as well as one of the participants. The program was built hearing the voices of youth, actually. What are the gaps and needs? And what we've heard throughout the different engagements throughout the years was to really better understand the climate mobility concepts, project development, monitoring, evaluation, access to resources, and communications. And we build the program around that. And indeed, we are happy to engage and collaborate with you also today. So With that, happy to be here with you today, as mentioned, and really connect the dots between human mobility, environment, and climate change, and the different policy processes, regionally, continentally, and globally, but really to hear also your solutions, your suggestions, how to address and take forward the challenges, the opportunities, but also address the challenges. So let's dive deeper into hearing from our panelists. We have Clive, Evupe, and Mika here, and let us first hear their introduction. So colleagues, please do a brief introduction of yourself and explain how you are leading in this space, migration and climate change and environment.
Thank you so much, Nora, for giving good background information and information about academic as well and issues around mobility. Once again, my name is Clive Dunley, Global Coordinator of the Children and Youth Media Group to UNEP, and also the co-chair of the UNEP's Group of Friends. And how are we young people leading the issue of mobility, and also how do we support this issue of the Nexus correlation? One, we're trying to support the areas of policy implementation by working collectively with governments and seeing how best we can be able to integrate youth solutions in supporting these decisions that have been made, given that young people are currently playing central role in advancing policy solutions. And just to give an example, through the Kampala Declaration, for example, through the Kampala Declaration, we young people have always been gathering mostly within the East Africa through and seeing how best we can be able to implement these solutions. And just recently, as the Africa Ministerial Conference of Environment was having its 40th anniversary of environmental diplomacy, we were able to push this key request. That is one of the key implementation pillar that the declaration is pushing for. And basically the solutions lies on how young people can be able to leverage policy solutions and how best can we be able to integrate the fragmented silos of the policy approaches. And already through innovative decisions and mostly on project implementation, we are seeing a lot of young people, mostly in Africa, coming up with innovative solutions and adaptive mechanisms that can be able to scale up the solutions, but also come up with a win-win solution that ensuring that those people who are moving, they are not only vulnerable, but also being part of the solution that is needed. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. I'm called Egbe. I'm from Cameroon. I'm the founder of One Green Africa. It's actually a youth-led non-governmental initiative working in Cameroon and intervening in areas of water conservation, mobility innovations, and climate change. So I'm here to present IOM. And we had a lot of engagements. Quickly, let me dive into them. And if we want to talk about how youth are engaging, how I am engaging at girls' level, talk about innovations. We are having practical innovations that bring youth to the forefront, because the tendency is youths have been discouraged in so many ways. Looking at the examples they have from elderly people, they feel like their voices will not be heard, but they are the core. And we, as One Green Africa, we as a youth-led government organization, we stand at the forefront to portray the image of youth using our little innovations and showing that if you can do what is led by passion, you can really go far from it. You can really go far with it. You cannot be discouraged based on past interventions, but you can make things go better. And you can also intervene in it's like youth mobility. We have actions in drought, we have actions in flooding, which are very, very key. And so innovations around that are supported by our partners. As you can see, IOM is pushing a lot. And we have other interventions where you can intervene within the policy space. You can make recommendations based on your realities on the field. So on this engagement, I call on every other person who has ideas. Like someone asked me from outside who asks tough questions. Yes, tough questions makes us to think out of the box and bring to limelight maybe factors that we had neglected so that together we can make it what they were. Thank you and over.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. My name is Mikhail Ifunau, Youth Delegate from Fiji, also the Project Technical Assistant with GIZ Fiji under the Human Mobility in the Context of Climate Change Project, and also serving as the President of the WWF Pacific Volunteer Program in Fiji. So in which I have been engaged in this space, so leading at the front in terms of responding to environmental change. In my capacity as the president of the WWF Pacific Volunteer Program, I help to coordinate and also co-create and design conservation projects with fellow youths from Fiji and the Pacific on how we can continue to restore ecosystems, protect and preserve Fiji's unique biodiversity. And also the volunteer program serves to mobilize youths in the climate space and also a way in which we can address current social issues that we face, diverting their attention away from the use of drugs and other issues. So by channeling their attention and energy in this space is how we can continue to engage youths in this space. And in terms of human mobility, as I mentioned, with the project that I'm part of, we are directly involved with the planned relocation work in Fiji in terms of supporting with policy developments and also ensuring that people of Fiji and communities that have been able to relocate move with dignity. Thank you.
Amazing. Let's clap for our panelists. Before we even start, but we have a great group here of experts, and we already heard, at least I heard, that there are solutions for people to stay, to move, and for those on the move already being implemented with the youth. But let's start with the policy discussion, as we are here ahead of the YEA-3. So first question going to Clive. What do you think are the missing dots and the opportunities in using the different Rio conventions to advance environment and mobility nexus at YEA?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, the environmental mobility nexus remains under leverage, mostly when it comes to the UNEA decisions. And the problem is not that UNEP or other multilateral bodies are not able to implement decisions around mobility, but already we see there's the issues of climate-induced mobility appears across different frameworks and different multilateral environmental agreements. It is rarely framed within the environmental governance mechanism. And for this reason, we are continuing to see fragmentation in various policy making that are not in line with the country-specific or national targets. And it becomes very difficult for governments to be able to anchor in the aspect of mobility within formal resolutions, and also calls for coherence on how this specific issue can be institutionalized. But additionally, when you check on the frameworks like the UNFCCC, the Loss and Damage Coalition, the issues of displacement, they hold a critical puzzle, and those pieces are the missing link pieces, the policy link synergies between one multilateral environmental agreement or one convention is missing. And this lack of coherence also reduces a lot of visibility, mostly on aspect of environmental mobility within global policy making process. As mentioned, now we're moving to the 7th session of the UN Environment Assembly. But what we really want to see is how the aspect of mobility nexus predominantly features into these resolutions that are being made and not being treated as fragmented silo. And within the multilateral climate finance window as well, it is also very, very important to have this predominant thought included mostly on how funding gaps can be able to be bridged in terms of closing the loopholes of mobility, because now we've been talking much about the triple planetary crisis, but within all this language of triple planetary crisis is now being reframed into global environmental challenges, you can find within all these links there's an aspect of mobility. Because I believe the aspect of mobility frames begin to the challenge of environment, how we relate to the environment into the policy, environmental governance landscape, but also how the geopolitics globally influences this aspect and this position. But now when it comes to the opportunities that exist, one, UNEP, in 2023, UNEP co-led a policy document with IOM calling on how they can be able to integrate, on how they can be able to implement these policy gap solutions. But again, colleagues, remember that all these challenges lies, all these gaps to be bridged, it lies with the member states who come to negotiate on this issue. And that is why lobbying within our governments also remains very, very important. And I just want to reference the Kampala Declaration on migration. And within the Kampala Declaration, as AMSEN was celebrating 40 years, within that declaration, it specifically requests the Africa Ministerial Conference of Environment to be able to incorporate or include a wider holistic system approach on tackling the issue of migration. And AMSEN is one of the key, only ministerial forums in the world that influences the decision that comes out of the UN Environment Assembly. And this is how we can begin lobbying or supporting implementation or closing the loophole gaps. And we can also develop a shared strategy that will be able to create momentum with coordination on action on how, for example, UNEP now, the fact that UNEP is developing its next medium-term strategy, we are seeing UNEP is now bringing in new pillars like tackling desertification as a new pillar being introduced to the MTS. And we know desertification is one of the key issues that causes mass mobility and movement all over the continent. And that is why we want to see how this nexus and how the opportunities within the environment, how can we be able to bridge in those gaps, ensure that the conventions do not work in silos. And also this is a question for you to think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clive. And yeah, actually, I wanted to also pose that question to you in the audience to think about what are the different ways that you can actually advocate for the inclusion of human mobility? If you think about the realities in your countries, the different human mobility dimensions, whether if it's related to displacement or the need to consider migration as an adaptation strategy. What can you do to advocate for the inclusion of this in the relevant policies or their implementation? But Clive, I also wanted to ask, what are the actual opportunities here now in the Youth Environmental Assembly to better incorporate these elements? For example, the Youth Declaration, is it already touching upon on this, or do we have a chance there?
Quickly responding on that, yes, the Global Youth Declaration is a big avenue for youths to, bring these emerging issues on environment. And recently, last year in the UNEP's Executive Director's report, she called for governments to begin tackling these emerging issues of environment. But now, because we're already identifying these nexus issues and nexus challenges, the Global Youth Declaration on Environment should be a standing pillar that influences the policy decisions and recommendations to countries or to governments in the negotiation process. And this is also a window how we can be able to bring this into the plenary discussions. Secondly, when it comes to consultation that we've been having on various very different resolutions, this is also an opportunity to propose on these tangible inputs. For example, as we go in the next OECPR negotiations next week, how can we be able to push for these specific policy positions through the consultation? That is also another window on how we can be able to take part into it. In the Global Major Group Stakeholders Forum is also another avenue where we'll be developing major groups common position and statement that will be recommended to member states and governments in the opening and closing of OECPR and UNEA. And that is also another window on how we can be able to influence this. But it does not only end here during UNEA, because on these resolutions, what we're also trying to see is how can we be able to recommend the implementation aspect, but also through the entire committee of permanent representative that continues in and out yearly, and we provide direct inputs to governments and they take them into consideration. And now that the medium-term strategy and the ministerial declaration is being finalized, that is also another window to close on this and to add these inputs. And lastly, just to mention the global environmental outlook that will be adopted in during UNEA week. It's also an area where we have been engaging the Geo Fellows to provide, of which whom I've also been working with Office of Chief Scientist, providing these inputs. But now here as young people, to be practically, we can be able to influence that declaration that is a sounding recommendation document on youth policy position to governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clyde, for sharing that. And what I get from that is there are these processes ongoing where there are opportunities to engage and also advocate and make your voices heard on this. We heard about the, let's say, global processes, but let's hear also a little bit when it comes to the national or regional level processes. Maybe if Wube and Mika, you would like to join how you've tried to engage in such policy processes, either national or at regional levels. What barriers have you faced, and what would be your solutions to overcome those?
So it is really challenging, but as young people, I must say we look at the opportunities, because the tendency is if we put in front the barriers, you will really be discouraged to begin with. So one of the very important and realistic challenge we face as youth is access to funding. Most of us are here, we could see on the site, you have accreditation, that doesn't guarantee funding. How many of us had the opportunity to come here fully funded? How many of us could not make it because we did not have funding? But what can we do? What actions are you pushing forward? Sometimes we create innovations that can help the community, but how can that innovation on its own generate income for sustainability? Can we look at that aspect as youth? Yes, we say you should help people on the move, people staying, but create innovations that can also generate its income, so that if you don't have funding, your organization, some of us seated here, we're funded by our organization, and if they were not making money, they wouldn't have sent us here. So secondly, I will just talk about knowledge and capacity gap. Particularly in some of our countries, we don't even have representation of youths in organizations like IOM. I am from Cameroon, and I remember once or twice I tried to engage within the regional office. I was shut off. I was told, Madam, come some other time. And you look at the people sitting there, they are older people, they don't hear our voice. And that is one of our problems for some of us sitting right here. And quickly, institutional rigidity. Some institutions are so rigid to even listen. Some of us are seated, but we are silenced because you fear who to talk to. You don't even know the right quarters to send your ideas to, but you have enough, so much to give as a youth. And if I have to talk about one or two of the solutions is lead with passion. What I usually tell the volunteers of One Green Africa, I work with volunteers, most organizations taking interns, but I've tried as a founder to streamline the meaning of a volunteer and an intern. I prefer, or our team prefers, to bring in volunteers. These are people who can give. This is a concept that some of us misunderstand. So what can you give to the organization, to the baby organization? What can you bring to the table? Okay, so I usually, I just stir them up. What do you think can be done for these people who are displaced? Because Cameroon is faced with a dual crisis. So we have a climate crisis, drought and flooding. And then we have another crisis, which is, I don't know if you've read on the news, the Anglophone crisis, where it's a socio-political crisis. And this at the end causes migration as well, because internally displaced people, they are moving and they are triggering the effects of climate change. So I asked the volunteers, what can you do to help these people? You stir the youths. So if you are engaging, you know that there is possibility for you to have a solution. And if we are leading by passion, the means will come. And we should, as youth who have had the opportunity to sit here, you should lead by example. Tell your story. Tell that young woman, that young guy that, hey, I didn't come from the silver spoon. I didn't come from the gold spoon. I came from the slums just like you. And if I'm sitting right here, you too can sit. And so that's our voice. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of how of a barrier and solutions that we could come up with it for us in Fiji, for a traditionally rich society such as Fiji and in the Pacific, where culture allows elders to be the ones that possess the decision-making powers, that leaves us youth or the younger ones often as observers and not as contributors, or to be able to have that ability to also influence the decisions that are being made. One of the things that we often encourage is that intergenerational dialogue, to be able to encourage youths as well as the older ones to be working together. And an approach that Fiji has taken is the Fiji Youth Parliament, in which youths are being provided the opportunity to see how it is like to be in parliament, to see how it is like to be a part of processes in policy developments and all those stuffs. So one is that, and the other one is what my colleague has mentioned in terms of funding. For the volunteer program, which I help to coordinate, we are a self-funded volunteer program. So we do our own fundraising in order to fund for our own projects and activities. And one of the barriers that we face is the access modalities to these fundings that we have. So a solution we push for is to have easy accessible funding or direct funding to enable use to access these funds and encourage more direct and community-led solutions.
Thank you, colleagues, for sharing those. And what I can also hear from there is, persistence is needed, and passion and braveness. That's always, we know that's not enough, and other tools and capacities are also needed. But those opportunities also exist. Actually, I want to mention one resource which provides quite a lot of information, and also a good resource and toolbook regards to this. There is an online youth guideline, Claim That Space, a youth leadership guide on migration, environment, and climate change. This focuses on the African continent, but if you think about it in your context, I'm sure that you can find some useful information there regards to that, as well as indeed a lot of resources to really learn more about this topic, and also how to take that forward through different means. And one of them is also how to engage in these policy processes, how to better implement at the local levels, do research and advocacy in this topic, and so on. So have a look at that resource. But then I would really like to hear really more about these solutions at the local levels that are implementing. And I would also like this question to go to the audience. So if you have solutions that you know that there has been an impact, once we hear first from our panelists, I would like to hear from you as well briefly. But over to Evupe and Mika on the youth-led climate mobility solutions at the local level, and what is the impact that you've seen?
So, like I said, we mentioned that youths, they have to push at the forefront, and you can gain a motivation from seeing a problem. A brief story of mine is coming from rural Cameroon. I started, like each and every one of us, I got the opportunity to study. And with the knowledge, I asked myself, what can we do? And so coming back home from my studies and finding out that there is a problem, which is waste is piling up. I was just mentioning to one of two friends out there that Nairobi and Kenya as a whole is really trying with regards to waste management. But it's not the case for most of us from West and Central Africa. We know what the situation is. So I saw that as an opportunity. And then looking at the aspect of mobility, which is internally displaced persons who are on the rise as a result of the dual crisis that I mentioned earlier. Now, how can we turn waste to opportunities? I started mobilizing through our organization young women who say they don't have what to do. So we started by conducting some surveys. What do you think you can do? We started picking plastics, and from there they are like, we want to join you. We don't know what you're doing, but we think we are idle enough to join you. So we see that from the beginning, from the core. Somebody just needs someone to stand at the front and say, I'm picking waste. Some people are shy. Some people don't come from the background that they can have the courage that you and I have to stand and speak in front of the camera, but they have a enough in their minds that they can really explore. So that's how we started. And one of our actions is upcycling these waste and empowering people on the move. And this is to generate income for them, to restore their dignity. And this has really gone a long way to help our displaced communities in Cameroon, because we go as far as creating the opportunity for them, training them, and seed funding them to start their small businesses. And if you and I can start something, it means we can go as far as engaging 1 or 2 more youths, and so the chain expands. So when I talk about innovations, leading innovations that can generate on its own, it means if tomorrow IOM does not have funding for us, our innovation can create such funding to still be here for maybe Youth Environmental Assembly 7, 8, and why not 10, generated from our innovation. And so those are some of the things that we should push forward. And if you are interested in collaborating, reach out. We are youths. And at this point, what I can say is, we are opportune to have the social media. Another thing is, let's use it wisely. Some of us are on platforms that do not matter to our career. Some of us are on platforms that just sell us to the wrong audience. How many of us seated in the hall are on LinkedIn? I was just asking a friend out, and I said, I would like you to join. And one person made a comment that LinkedIn is for serious people. Are you not serious? Join LinkedIn. So it is our platform. It is our world. It is for us to make the change. And so you start little and see the world view. Look beyond your country. Stop blaming the people who have lived their lives and they are seated in the government. I am a case study. I remember anytime I take on the flight and I say I'm a Cameroonian, everybody talks about my president. But I'm not here to talk about my president. It is my impact. Because tomorrow, when you're gone, you remember by what you did as a person and not what Cameroon did. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm lost of words after hearing all she said. So in terms of solutions that youths are driving in terms of mobility solutions, as well as ecosystem restoration, as well as the pollution reduction, I'll be sharing 2 success stories, I may say. So firstly is on mobility solutions, how youths have been at the forefront of driving solutions. For us in Fiji, I guess we are the first to have our standard operating procedure for planned relocation globally. We'll be able to develop this after the successful relocation of 6 communities. So after we have successfully relocated 6 communities, so from the learnings of the 6 communities, we've been able to develop our SOP and planned relocation to help us guide our future planned relocation projects. So as we speak, Fiji is currently working on relocating 2 communities. One which is due to landslide, and the other one which is sea level rise. So how have youths been at the forefront in this? So as I mentioned already, for us Fiji and the Pacific, where tradition and culture is very sensitive. So when communities are earmarked to be relocated, something that happens is that the communities are often hesitant to move because they are more connected to their culture, connected to traditions, and they're connected to the land. So they wish to stay and remain the place that they are living in. So this is where I guess youths come in. We get to build the gap. We get to build the bridging. So we are science reports. We are aware of all this that is happening. So we are the ones who can, through that intergenerational dialogue, we can influence the ones that science reports are mentioning this, so the urgency to move is pretty high. So there have been cases in Fiji where in society are hesitant to move, and youths are being encouraged in the SOP. There's a series of consultations that needs to happen until the community agrees that yes, we are willing to move, because the community themselves have to agree that they agree to move. So in that series of consultations, this is when we youths to be able to create a dialogue, to speak to elders, and also influence them that yes, it is time to move. And in the second success story that I would like to highlight is the work done by the WWF Pacific volunteers. As I've mentioned, that we are a self-funded program, so we don't often have the funds to fund for our projects. So what we do is that we do our own fundraising. We conduct raffle tickets. We ask our volunteer members to donate. We started off in 2011 members, and as of now, we have over 320 registered youths that are involved in this program. And an example that I would provide is something similar to the WIS project. Ever since I took on this in this capacity as the president, I really wanted to take home a project to be implemented back in my village. So something that I've identified in my village is that how communities, I mean, this happens a lot in Fiji, I'm not sure about the others, how we always dump rubbish into rivers. So as I got to university, I had the opportunity to study in university, I got to plastics that often end up in, I mean, how microplastics can then, and then the very river in which this waste is being dumped in, we have freshwater mussels. And the communities, they die for these freshwater mussels to be sold markets and also for source of protein at homes. So freshwater mussels are filter feeders. So they feed on these microplastics that are being from this waste that is being dumped into the river. So the very waste you dump into the river is being the filter feeders, the freshwater mussels, they feed on them, and then the communities themselves, when they consume these freshwater mussels, the microplastic ends up in your body, can cause serious health issues. So this is what I was able to learn from university, and I came back and we sat together with the volunteer program, and we tried to come up with an initiative to try and solve this issue. So we did the project in the village in which we were able to raise 3,000 Fijian dollars, right? Just by the volunteers, we did fundraising and to fund for our activity. So as my colleague has mentioned, is that we don't actually limit ourselves with what society often tells us. We know we have the to do things, we have the energy to do things, so why not invest in this? So there are many other solutions and stories that I have, but I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And indeed, it's so important to hear this, what the strength of youth actually is to take forward the local level implementation. We heard the expertise, the leadership, understanding the local context, building the trust and commitment and access to local communities, but then also having these ideas, the effectiveness and looking at these innovations. We heard some solutions for people to stay, but also people to move. And through this capacity enhancement program that we've just implemented, there were several solutions that the local youth-led organizations are looking at, focusing on nature-based solutions, climate-smart agriculture and agroforestry, renewable energy, circular economy, data and technology, looking at skills development, empowerment of communities, but also looking at early warning and risk mapping and several solutions. But I would like to hear now from you. Maybe we can take 2 examples. If there is anyone who would like to share, what is a solution that you've implemented at the local level and what impact it has created within brief 1 minute. Anyone who wants to share? There, back there, and then let's take you after. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Catherine. We had a project of treating grey water. Grey water is the household water that we all use, apart from the black water. Like you wash your utensils, your clothes, all that, that is grey water. So I was involved in a project, and it was in the refugees in Kakuma, most of us who know Kakuma. And one thing that I noticed was most of the kids were malnutritioned. So I was like, yeah, this is a project. But will you work with women and kids who are malnutritioned? No. So it was my MSc project where I was treating ternary effluent using nature-based solution. But now at this case, I thought, then why not try the household water? That's what we are calling grey water. And so we started treating the grey water, with actually biochar and moringa. And yeah, there was enough reduction that you can encourage reuse. And so one of the things that we did was now to encourage the community, those who participated in the project. One thing that you have to do is you start a kitchen garden, you know. So with the kitchen garden, they planted vegetables, and through the vegetables, they were able even to sell to the neighbors. And through that, their diet, it improved. Because now there is inclusion of vegetables. We also included groundnuts. There's some protein. Yeah, and they are doing well. Thank you.
From the Youth Cafe, a youth-led and youth-serving and governmental organization. So we engaged young people to know what is the impetus for migrating. And for this, we were focusing on young between the 13 and 18, and also we wanted to see the nexus between migration and climate. And young people told us, of course, one is lack of knowledge on the risks of irregular migration. And number two is also lack of sensitization on other alternatives. And from that, we came up with a curriculum, Safe Migration Information Technology, which we've currently gone through a hell of a time trying to pass through the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. Of course, the government will not accept that there is nothing much about migration and mobility in the current curriculum. And so after this, that you cannot directly sensitize school students, so we have to sensitize teachers and then sensitize who will sensitize the students. But this is also, asking from them and the rest an advice of what can we do to make the governments inculcate into the curriculum the nexus between migration and climate, but also bring about the risk of irregular migration and also educating on what are the alternatives, because there are a lot of alternatives, especially for young people who have the impetus to migrate. But indeed, the young people also are very good at informing, because they informed us that that lack of knowledge and, of course, the lack of sensitization and also lack of knowing the alternatives is a great way. And of course, a wake-up call on people to partners, because we only do between 3 counties to sensitize the students. We can partner to scale this up, not just to the other 46 counties, but also in other countries.
Thank you so much for sharing those examples. And sensitization is actually something that we hear also a lot, especially if you are doing something new, different. You really have to have the persistence to also sensitize and advocate for these solutions. I think we heard 2 examples from Kenya, so I would like to hear also maybe 2, but very brief, because we have been asked to close already. So keep it very short. One, and anyone else from not Kenya? I think I saw there you. So you first, and then you go first.
So hello everyone. I will start with introducing myself. My name is Siam Mahamoud Mohamed. So I work for the International Humanitarian Law and Youth Initiative, which is a youth-led movement focused on the intersection of conflict, climate, and also humanitarian law. So obviously, one of the examples that I would like to give is the Somalia, the country that I'm originally from, which is a country at war, as I'm sure everyone here knows, that has a lot of social issues. And I think that one of the issues is also the climate crisis, the environmental crisis. One of the things that I have maybe noticed talking with a lot of people from past generations in Somalia is that they maybe don't really make the link between social issues that they're going through and the environmental crisis. And to put together this gap is basically to put, I would say, an emphasis on the education and teach people that the environmental crisis and the social issues they're going through go together. And in order for them to have a better life, sustainable life, is to be educated on waste management, for instance. We have a Somali Youth Climate Platform that have gathered 500 participants with 35% of women, which I believe is great, because at the same time they are fighting climate change, but also they are maybe fighting gender inequality in those discussions. Though this platform actually has worked to on reforestation of degradation land, coastal ecosystem restoration, and the things they have been working on they were able, to contribute to policy decision within the country, and their work were able to, we've seen people being able to have fund they blocked to be able to clean the beaches and ecosystem restoration, as I said. I also believe in my organization that I represent today that funding, as you said, Madam Ewebe, is one of the key problems for youth, but we also have social media, and it costs nothing to have a social, I would say, a campaign on social media, a Youth for Climate Change campaign. So I believe this is a good example to have, and thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for bringing that aspect as well. And I can't help to mention that actually on 5th in the afternoon, we'll have a session together with the ZIMG, the Children and Youth Major Group for UNEP and UNICEF on climate mobility, youth, and peace and security. So please join also that. I will do another advertisement also once we move forward. But let's take the last intervention.
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Ismail Abu Karaswan. I'm from Somalia. I work for Somali Environmental Development Organization, SEDO. We work for environmental and climate change issues in Somalia. Special, when we are talking for the program, we take for money programs for in Somali, special restoration for the environment. We take for a campaign for the community for we call for make your city green. That is our campaign. And the other one we make for the plastic pollution. For that campaign was take for the ocean in Somalia, especially Mogadishu. We did for many different areas for the restoration for the environment, and we are making for the tree planting. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's important always to think about really, and you know what the local solutions, what the local context is, so you know what can work there. Sorry, I think I promised to you, so go ahead for the last one.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Nansiwa. I'm a geospatial specialist and I'm managing director of Smart Afrogrix, which is a youth-led social enterprise focused on sustainable agriculture. So in recent years, for the last 3 years, we founded this organization and a company, and we've been working with smallholder farmers in the arid and semi-arid lands in Kenya and East Africa. And we're working with them, and our approach is known as participatory action research model, where we work with these farmers so that with them they contribute solutions that works for them, and then from there we design these solutions for them with them. So one of the projects we are doing is we provide with them drought-resistant seedlings, and then we also provide with them organic fertilizers, and also we teach them on climate smart agriculture practices and do smart irrigation. So far we've impacted 10,000 smallholder farmers, and this one has prevented them from migrating because of drought. So they don't have to migrate because of drought, but they migrate by choice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very happy to hear, and I would really love to hear more, but we've been asked to close because the other session is starting. So let's continue engaging with among us as we are here. And I would also like to advertise that on the 7th, for those who are still here, we are organizing at the end of the Youth Environmental Assembly an intergenerational networking event. So bring there your pitches, what you can do at the local levels to address climate mobility solutions. But to close up here with the panel, maybe within very short 1, 2, 3 words, What are your suggestions? We heard a lot about this intergenerational gap that might be there. So how can different generations work together to ensure that migration and environmental policies and implementation do really address the realities of youth in the changing environment over the climate?
Yeah, basically what we need to design a governance mechanism that incorporates mobility as a legitimate aspect of environmental governance. Yeah, thank you.
Quickly, we need to tap on the wisdom of those who have been ahead of us, looking at how they cope before we came as young people. With such wisdom, we can be able to innovate and move forward, making sure sustainability is guaranteed. Thank you.
And finally, in simple terms, shifting from aging and saging to co-creation.
Thank you so much for the panelists. Thank you so much for the audience. And I wish you fruitful networking and the event here at the Youth Environmental Assembly. And please do advocate for the inclusion of human mobility. Thank you so much. Enjoy.